The most horrifying medieval torture methods ever used in the Middle Ages. People didn't confess the truth. They confessed whatever made the pain stop. No battlefield, no war, just a room designed to break you, because behind the castles, the armor, and the idea of honor, there was a system, legal, structured, and terrifyingly effective. A system where pain became proof, and silence could cost you everything. And some of the methods used were so disturbing. They don't just shock you, they make you ask, how far can power really go when no one stops it? To understand how these practices took root, you have to step into the mindset of the time. In parts of the Middle Ages, torture wasn't always seen as cruelty. It was framed as a path to truth. Courts and authorities believed that if someone was guilty, pressure would force a confession. And if they were innocent, some argued that divine intervention would protect them. That belief system alone opened the door to methods that were as systematic as they were brutal. One of the most infamous was the rack, a device designed to stretch the human body beyond its natural limits. The victim's wrists and ankles were bound to rollers, and as the mechanism turned, the body was pulled apart. Joints dislocated, muscles tore, and with each increment, the pain intensified in a controlled, deliberate way. It wasn't instant. It was gradual, which made it even more effective for extracting information, because the goal wasn't always death, it was confession. Another widely referenced method is the Iron Maiden, often depicted as a human-shaped container lined with spikes. While modern historians debate how commonly it was actually used versus later exaggeration, the concept itself reflects something important: the psychological impact of torture. The mere existence or belief in such devices was enough to instill fear long before any physical harm occurred. And that fear was a powerful tool. Then there were methods designed around suspension. Victims might be hoisted by their arms, sometimes tied behind their backs, placing immense strain on the shoulders. In many cases, this led to dislocation. The body's own weight became the instrument of pain. Sometimes additional weights were attached to the feet, increasing the tension and accelerating injury. Again, the focus was control, applying just enough force to push a person to the edge, without immediately ending their life. Water was another element used in disturbing ways. Early forms of what we now recognize as water-based torture involved forcing individuals to ingest large quantities of liquid, creating intense physical distress and a sensation of drowning. It blurred the line between suffocation and survival, leaving victims disoriented and desperate. But not all methods relied on complex devices. Some were deceptively simple. Confinement, for example, could be used as a form of torture on its own. Being locked in tight, dark spaces for extended periods created psychological breakdown. Sensory deprivation, no light, no sound, no sense of time, could unravel a person's mind just as effectively as physical pain. And then there was public exposure. Punishment wasn't always hidden behind walls. In some cases, individuals were displayed in public devices that restricted movement and invited humiliation. The crowd became part of the process, mocking, shaming, reinforcing the consequences of stepping outside accepted norms. Because torture wasn't just about the individual, it was about sending a message. But here's where it becomes even more unsettling. These methods weren't random. They were structured within legal and institutional systems. In certain regions, torture could only be applied under specific conditions, often when there was already evidence against someone. But once that threshold was crossed, the process became methodical, and confessions obtained under these conditions were often accepted as truth. Think about that. A system where pain becomes proof, where suffering becomes evidence, where the outcome is shaped not by facts, but by endurance. It creates a dangerous loop, one where the method itself guarantees the result. Because under enough pressure, anyone will say anything to make it stop. And that's exactly what made these practices effective, not because they revealed truth, but because they produced it. Another layer to consider is how these methods evolved over time. As authorities encountered resistance or silence, techniques were adjusted, refined to prolong endurance, to increase psychological strain, to maintain control for longer periods. It wasn't static, it adapted, which tells you something important. This wasn't chaos. It was a system built on the idea that control could be enforced through fear, pain, and public demonstration. And once that system is accepted, it becomes self-sustaining. People comply not just because of what happens to them, but because of what they see happen to others. And the deeper you look into it, clearer it becomes. The real power of these methods wasn't just in the physical damage they caused. It was in the environment they created. An environment where silence felt safer than truth, and where resistance came at a cost few were willing to pay. But this is only part of the story. Because some of the most disturbing methods weren't just about breaking the body. They were about reshaping fear itself. And this is where the system reveals its darkest layer. Because some methods weren't just designed to hurt, they were designed to reshape behavior through fear. In many regions influenced by tribunals like the medieval Inquisition, torture became part of a broader psychological framework. It wasn't always about extracting information anymore. It was about creating certainty in the minds of everyone watching, because when punishment is predictable, fear becomes automatic. Take devices like the strappado, where a person was suspended by their arms tied behind their back. Even before the full force was applied, the anticipation alone could break someone. The body knew what was coming. The mind imagined it in advance. And often, that anticipation did more damage than the act itself. This is the pattern you begin to see over and over again, not just pain, but controlled escalation. Methods were often applied in stages. Pressure would increase gradually, giving the illusion that confession could stop the process, and in many cases it did. Not because the truth was revealed, but because the human mind has limits. Push it far enough, and survival takes over everything else, which turns torture into something even more dangerous. A tool that doesn't just force answers, manufactures them. And then there was the public dimension. Punishments carried out in front of crowds weren't just about the individual. They were about reinforcing social order. Devices that restrained movement, exposed individuals, or forced them into uncomfortable positions became spectacles. People didn't just hear about consequences. They saw them, they felt them. And over time, that visibility shaped behavior across entire communities. Because fear spreads faster when it's witnessed. But here's the deeper, more unsettling truth. These systems didn't survive because they were hidden. They survived because they were accepted. Authorities justified them. Institutions regulated them. And ordinary people, in many cases, normalized them. When a practice becomes part of the structure, legal, cultural, even moral, it stops being questioned. It becomes reality, and once something becomes reality, it becomes very difficult to challenge, which is why these methods lasted for centuries. Not because people didn't recognize the suffering, but because the system around it made that suffering seem necessary. And that's the part history forces us to confront. Because when you strip away the devices, the methods, the terminology, what you're left with is a pattern. A system where power uses fear to maintain control, where truth becomes secondary to compliance, where silence is safer than resistance. And those patterns don't belong to just one era. They appear in different forms across time. If this made you uncomfortable, it should. Because history isn't just about what happened. It's about what humans are capable of justifying. If you want more deep, unsettling, and eye-opening stories that uncover the hidden side of history, the parts rarely talked about, make sure you subscribe and stay with us. Because the deeper you go, more you realize. History doesn't just show us the past, it shows us patterns. And once you see those patterns, you can't unsee them.